I'm Ellen McKee, Biodiversity and Business Partnerships Manager at BirdLife International. And for the past few months, I've had the real pleasure of working with a group of students who are doing the Masters in Leadership at the University of Cambridge. In my job at BirdLife International, I work with businesses who are really struggling on looking at what tools and data sets they need to use in order to assess and manage their impact on nature. And that's really what this project has been about. So the next slide.
The clicker.
Tech issues already. Oh, there we go. That's good. So this is the amazing project team. We've got Czarina, who's a proud Filipino conservation social scientist with over a decade of experience working in the environmental NGOs such as the Haribon Foundation and the WWF. Czarina has national and local government experience with also businesses and policymakers and innovators, where she's pushing for systemic changes and achieving conservation targets for biodiversity and plastic pollution. She is interested in influencing behaviour change and working with businesses to drive transformation and change in conservation. And we've got Caesar, who's also joining us online today. He began work in Bangladesh through village-led conservation efforts to protect threatened species in remote areas of the Chittagong Hill Tracts. He found the organisation Creative Conservation Alliance, otherwise known as CCA, a non-profit organisation dedicated to conserving globally imperiled species and their habitats in Bangladesh. Under his leadership and with support from national and international colleagues, CCA has achieved some major milestones towards protecting and restoring a number of globally threatened species, including turtles, tortoises, gibbons, and pangolins. He and his team initiated the first ever reintroduction of the critically endangered Asian giant tortoises, resulting in 70% survival rate and achieving zero poaching of released tortoises in the area. The work has been recognised by 3 international awards: the Whitley Award, Future for Nature, and the Explorers Club Neo Explorer Award. Then we have Nobert, who's here with us. Nobert is a Kenyan environmental planner and a climate change professional with over 17 years experience, working with the local, national and international NGOs on climate change adaptation and policy development. He has in the past been part of the Kenyan delegation engaged in climate change negotiations at the UNFCCC COPs, and he is keen on advocating for the interpretation of policies to actions. Furthermore, Norbert has an interest in furthering his understanding on the nexus between climate change and biodiversity and the conservation policy process, and thus is currently pursuing this Masters in Conservation Leadership as a Commonwealth and Cambridge Trust Scholar. Lastly, but not least, we've got Harshini, is a Sri Lankan conservation professional with 2 decades experience working with multiple governance sectors in Sri Lanka and overseas, including over 10 years with the private sector, mainstreaming biodiversity into business. She has also worked in other fields, including conservation education, environmental management, and climate change response, and has been a catalyst for collaborative initiatives in conservation between multiple industry sectors. Harshini has worked with over 30 nationalities across 5 continents and is currently pursuing this Masters as a Gates Cambridge Scholar. So I think you can agree, an incredibly impressive group of people here. In this project, we have looked at the tools indicated by the Science-Based Targets for Nature Network, as well as the Taskforce for Nature-related Financial Disclosures. Both are key frameworks in driving corporate engagement on their nature-related impacts and dependencies. This project will attempt to summarise those tools and provide some insights into when they can be used and if they should be used. So without further ado, I'll pass on to the amazing project team.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So I've been tasked with laying the foundation in terms of context and introducing the project to y'all. First of all, I need to introduce the amazing advisory team that we have had throughout the period that we've been working on this project. Ellen just introduced herself, but we also had Dr. Andrew Plumtree, head of the Key Biodiversity Area Secretariat, who's unfortunately unable to join today, but I hope he's online. And of course, we wouldn't have been able to complete this without our amazing academic supervisors and support system, which included Dr. Howard Nelson, Miss Jane Corbett, Miss Lisa Harris. Right, so to set the background, all of us know, I think, or at least most of us know that in December 2022, at the COP15 or the Conference of Parties, 15th Conference of Parties held in Kunming, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was set and all the parties to the CBD actually signed up on it and agreed or committed to take this forward. And target 15 of this GBF, as I may shorten it, basically calls on all businesses to assess, disclose, and reduce biodiversity-related risks and negative impacts. Essentially, it encourages businesses to regularly monitor, assess, and transparently disclose their transactions with biodiversity, provide information to consumers so that sustainable consumption can be promoted, and report on compliance with access and benefit sharing regulations and measures. So what are we hoping to achieve through this target? Ultimately, to reduce negative impacts on biodiversity, obviously, which is key, increase the positive impacts, to reduce biodiversity-related risks to business and financial institutions, which basically fund all this activity that is happening in our ecosystem, and ensure sustainable patterns of production. But now, how do we actually see if we are actually achieving this target? The headline indicator for this particular target is identified as the number of companies reporting on disclosures of risks, dependencies, and impacts on biodiversity. So by 2050, this is actually what we will be looking at in order to ensure that we have achieved or not achieved, or there is more to be done in terms of achieving target 15. Right, so let's talk about companies and businesses. Basically, we have companies and businesses which make use of resources from the environment. And then we have financial institutions, which also you could categorize as a company, but they have a bigger stake, although not usually identified, in transactions because they fund most of the economic activity that happens through the companies. Factories, maybe offices, whatever it may be. So all these companies and businesses basically transact with our natural environment. And when they transact with our natural environment, what happens? There are interdependencies between these two areas. There are impacts that are caused by businesses to nature, and also nature impacts businesses in terms of hazardous environments, natural disasters, etc. Then there are risks posed by each other and opportunities that can be created within this relationship for companies to actually excel and do something positive for nature ultimately. So how can businesses and companies actually help the world achieve this target? There are some reporting and disclosure frameworks or standards which have already been created or developed. And some of these are listed here. So the Carbon Disclosure Project, now known as CDP, initially started off to help disclosing the carbon emissions of companies. But now they call themselves CDP because now they have upgraded or updated or adapted to even looking at the biodiversity impact that these companies are creating. So likewise, there's a plethora of systems and standards or frameworks that companies can access to help achieve this target. Finally, I would like to mention the Science-Based Targets Network, SbTN, and Taskforce for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, TNFD, because these are the two frameworks that we actually looked at through this project. So the Science-Based Targets Network was initially founded in 2019. So this was 3 years before the GBF came into place. This is a group of global NGOs who help collectively define what is necessary for companies to operate and grow sustainably. So it's basically an initiative of the global NGOs working in this area. This succeeds the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which was set up in 2015 to, as I said, achieve climate goals. So most of these frameworks that are in place right now are kind of evolutions of the frameworks that were developed to achieve climate goals initially. This uses a 5-step approach, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to help companies to set biodiversity targets. Once they have assessed their impacts and dependencies, to set targets to change their operations or change their management, this system uses a 5-step approach. And it provides a referral list of service providers which can support companies reach their biodiversity objectives. Then we have the Taskforce for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD. This is a market-led, science-based and government-supported initiative in comparison to the SbTN, which is an NGO-based one. This is a government-supported global initiative, and this was founded in 2020. This was recognized by and formally launched with the co-chairmanship of the CBD's Executive Secretary in 2022. Its recommendations and guidance provides organizations with a risk management and disclosure framework to act on evolving nature-related dependencies, impacts, risks, and opportunities. And it uses the L.E.A.P approach, the L.E.A.P approach, to help companies set biodiversity targets. It's designed to provide decision-useful information for capital providers and businesses. And it provides a catalog of tools which can support companies reach their biodiversity objectives. Now, TNFD, since it is recognized by the CBD Secretariat, it has already formed a collaboration with the I.B.A.T Alliance to help create an integrated version of the I.B.A.T biodiversity map. Okay, so I mentioned the L.E.A.P approach used by the TNFD and the 5-step approach used by the SbTN. But this actually, both these approaches overlap with each other and makes it easy for companies to actually use either of the frameworks. So even if you use the SbTN framework or the TNFD framework, there are steps that overlap with each other and they are able to kind of correlate with each other for ease of reporting. I will now come to the project overview. So why was this project conceived in the first place? There was a need to create awareness amongst businesses on international processes and the jargon used. So all this jargon that I've been mentioning before, 95% of the companies in the world are SMEs, not the Nestle's, the Unilevers, the Coca-Colas. They may understand what's going on in these global processes, but 95% of companies don't. And in order to help them help the world achieve this target, we need to clarify this jargon being used. Sorry. Then there's also a need to avoid confusion caused by the multiplicity of tools. There are 100 odd tools only within these two frameworks, which obviously creates a lot of confusion amongst businesses. Then there's also a need to provide guidance on the suitability and applicability of these standards of the specific tools, because we need to make sure that they actually serve to help companies reduce their biodiversity impacts. There's also a need to clarify how these tools deliver specific biodiversity positive outcomes. And of course, this information that we generated through this project will help the collaboration formed between the TNFD and I.B.A.T Alliance going forward. So we set some objectives before getting on to the nitty-gritties of the project. First one was to investigate some of the tools presented by these two frameworks and look at how they are approaching this, how are they approaching the achievement of this target. Second one was to disseminate the findings to academic, private sector, and NGO communities, like what we're doing here today, to make understanding and decision-making processes easier. And the third one was to support the collaboration between the TNFD and the I.B.A.T Alliance. So what's the methodology we pursued? First of all, in the planning phase, we did a lot of literature and material review, and we had a consultation with the KBA and the I.B.A.T partners. Then in the second step, we investigated all the tools. So for that, we created a matrix. We entered data, classified and updated as we went along. The third step, the analysis, there's a lot of data filtering going on and a lot of analysis and interpretation and compiling the findings. And finally, the presentation, like what we're doing here today, and we're also heading towards a peer review and publication of these findings. So that's a snapshot of the matrix that we created. It's a lot of data, a lot of interrelationships. But what did we essentially look at? So the first category of information or the data that we took was identification and access information, how to identify a tool. So the names, the developing organizations, the brief introduction, et cetera, and in which list it appears. The second category was the primary classification, where we classified all the tools based on their industry application, the type of tool, the geographical application, and what kind of disclosures they actually presented. And as for the L.E.A.P approach and the five-step approach of the SbTN, what kind of targets were they helping achieve? And also, do they actually address biodiversity or don't they? And do they actually address natural processes? Third category that we looked at was biodiversity assessment. Under biodiversity itself, so the tools that actually looked at biodiversity, to what level were they looking at? Were they looking at species? Were they looking at ecosystems? Under species, what sort of in-depth analysis were they doing? Under ecosystems, what were they looking at? What were the data sets that they were using? What were the were they spatially analyzing these things? And also, what sort of impacts, dependencies, risks, or opportunities were they trying to identify? And of course, we had to look at the technical access information in terms of a corporate trying to use these tools. Are they being offered freely, or are there other methodologies publicly available? Do you have to pay for it? Do you have to have internal skills to use these tools? Finally, to come to the overview of the tools that we actually analyzed from these two frameworks. So we had a total of 143 tools that we investigated, 102 from the TNFD and 41 from SbTN. One tool from SbTN was considered invalid because it wasn't giving us any information at all. 3 tools from TNFD were considered inactive because no one could use it, although it was just online. There was no information on how it could be used. 2 tools were duplicated in TNFD. 5 tools were overlapped between SbTN and TNFD. Therefore, we ended up with 132 tools to be investigated. So what were these tools all about? So we categorized them into the type of tools. And then we found some tools as being methods or approaches, some as being guidance documents, some online software, downloadable software, databases, satellite imagery and GIS, and consultancy companies. There was a whopping 39 of these listed tools, which were actually consultancy companies. So are consultancy companies tools, or are they service providers? This is the question that we came up. Whereas TNFD doesn't really define this, SbTN had actually defined the consultancy companies as service providers. So how we define service providers here is, are those companies which are able to provide holistic, comprehensive services to other companies which are looking to kind of assess their biodiversity impacts. So there is an opportunity for collaboration amongst these consultancy companies and also with the other actual tools that can to provide comprehensive services to companies. So out of the 132 tools which we initially investigated, 39 consultancy companies were found out, and therefore we ended up with 93 tools which we actually evaluated in detail. And now I will hand over to Nobert, who will tell you about all our general findings.
Yeah, thank you, Harshini, for that. I'll take you through the general findings, just speaking from the 93 tools that have been mentioned.
Elisa. Yeah, I don't know why.
All right. These 93 tools we looked at, we classified them based on their geographical application. And in this, then we had two sets of geographical application in terms of scale and also in terms of the ecosystems applicable in it. So in this, then you can clearly see that most of these tools were global. When we analyzed, we realized that most of them could be applied globally, and only a few of them, that is 10%, were applicable regionally. And when we speak about regions, then there were some we looked at which were really focused on some certain regions, maybe Europe or Asia. And then some others, 19 or 20% of the tools were applicable nationally. And from there, then there are also the overlaps where you could get that a tool is being applied at a national scale, but also at a regional scale. And from there, then in terms of the ecosystem, from the TNFD and SbTN, there are like 4 different ecosystems. That is land, ocean, freshwater, and atmosphere. So for the purpose of this study, then we just looked at the 3. And out of these 3, we actually looked at and we identified that most of these tools were applicable in freshwater, though later on, as my colleague will be presenting, we'll also look at the dynamics around that. So 53% of those tools are applicable in freshwater system, 67% in land, and 19% in ocean. But there are also those interlinkages where there were those overlaps where you could get that one tool is being applied in land and at the same time in ocean. So looking at this, out of these 93 tools, we looked at the active ones. We also looked at ones which looked at the disclosures, because from TNFD gives a clear guidance on how these disclosures are being looked at. And out of that, then 63% of the total tools indicated their alignment with the disclosures. But in terms of these disclosures, just to bring you to speed, according to TNFD, they have been classified into 4. One is on governance, which actually looks at the organization's governance related to nature-related dependencies, impacts, and risks, as Harshini have mentioned. And then on strategy, that is where they're looking at maybe the models for the organizations on how they are actually looking at those dependencies and the impacts. And then on risk and impacts management, then that is a classification which actually looks at how these organizations identify and monitor these different impacts and opportunities. And in terms of metrics and targets, then this is where now the tools are able to disclose the metrics and the targets used to assess and manage the material nature related to all these dependencies and opportunities and risks. But that notwithstanding, we looked at those tools collectively just under TNFD out of these 93. Then the 59 tools, 41% of those tools were actually indicating their alignment with the metrics and targets, and 32% on strategy, 29% on risk and impact management, and only 7% on governance. And remember, all these tools, because we are coming from a point of view where these tools are being designed to look at how then do they help financial institutions and also different private sector organizations to disclose on their impact on nature. So when it comes to governance, and you see that small percentage is actually aligning to that governance disclosure, that it means that there's that opportunity and that's maybe gap to be addressed. So going forward, this is just a classification, because looking at the TNFD and the SbTN, there's a way they have now categorized this according to sectors. And from these sectors, you realize that because all these tools, they have to look at which sectors are actually they're relevant to. So from TNFD, there were like 11 different sectors where these tools are applicable. And then on SbTN, which is more comprehensive, then has looked at different categories, and all these categories are still being developed, because they are really trying to see how they can align these different sectors between SbTN and also TNFD, so that by the time they are reporting on the L.E.A.P process, then it brings all these sectors together. So that alignment is actually something that is really being considered. And out of that, you will see this graph, which looks at the industrial sector applicability. And from this, you can easily see that renewable resource and alternative energy and food and beverage are the sectors that were these tools were highly applied to, because they are sectors that are high impact, and they're also sectors that actually have high usage. So from this, you can see that remember, these tools are really focusing on how then these different private sectors and financial institutions can maybe report on their impact on nature. And if that is the case, then you can see from this graph that for financials, which is very crucial, that is only 74% applicability. So it means that actually that is the one that should be higher than any other sector. So there's an opportunity for these tools to be developed further and also to be acquired or maybe applied to different sectors, so that we achieve the goal, target 15, the GBF. So based on that, then out of the overlapping tools that Harshini mentioned, 5 of them are that overlapping. We looked at how then they are covering the different L.E.A.P process. And out of that, then you could see we found out that our corporate biodiversity footprint covered all the L.E.A.P process. Remember, not all of them, because there are some which maybe were covering one element of the L.E.A.P process. And for corporate biodiversity footprint was covering the 4 processes under TNFD, but under SbTN, they were covering 3. Remember, under SbTN, the most developed ones are the first 3, that is assess, interpret and prioritize, measure, set and disclose. But these other 2, act and track, are still yet to be fully developed. They're still being developed. And that is also a recommendation which we'll look at later on, because this is something that really needs to be taken up. Instead of just maybe developing these tools, then we also need to see after maybe they've been applied, how do we track or how do we measure their effectiveness? So the second one is ENCO, which only cover the 2 processes of L.E.A.P, and also covering the 3 for SbTN. And the IBAT was only touched on the L, but covering the 3 under SbTN. Land reform was covering all the 4 phases of TNFD, and also the same with SbTN, and protected planet also covered just 1. So we just wanted to show that overlapping maybe the nature of these tools, and also the phases that they're covering in both. So to look at the alignment with different aspects of the L.E.A.P, that is something I've mentioned. There was one that was actually not very clear on how they align into these different aspects. But the good thing is that out of these, then 90% of these tools were aligning to this L.E.A.P process, which is a positive mark. And looking at the technical access information, this was crucial, because remember, we are dealing with different private farms and also small scale businesses. And for us to look at accessibility, this is crucial, because some of these tools are to be applied by these small scale businesses. And an issue of accessibility is critical in this. And the ones that also required subscription, this, when we look at that, then it's also crucial, because some of them maybe might not be able to raise some of the exorbitant prices of fees that are set by some of these tools. So it was also crucial for us to look at that. And then looking at accessibility in terms of whether some are free or some are paid. This, we realize that some of these consultancy firms, then instead of offering you the tool, then they had maybe a template where they needed you to reach out to them for them to maybe do a demo. So that is also a crucial aspect for us to look at. And then in terms of accessibility, that is another one, because these tools, essentially, they should be actually publicly available to most of these private firms. And then with the ones that require skills, some of these we realize that they require some specialized trainings like GIS or how to maybe interpret some of this information and generate maybe that. So out of all this, you can see how they panned out. But for these paid versions, that is where we recognized that most of these private bodies, maybe consultancy firms, then were the ones that were advancing that. So I'll hand it over to my colleague to continue from there. Thank you.
My clicker's not working, so please bear with me. I'll just try to hold the clicker just to pretend that it's moving. So how's everyone still? So from 132 tools that Harshini shared, it went down to 93 to remove the consultancy companies. And now we're in this portion wherein we want to just focus on those tools that they say they will be using biodiversity. So for that, you'll see that out of the 93, only 34 or 37% use biodiversity. And these are the conditions that we try to consider for doing this. One, earlier, Harshini shared about the 7 categories that we have. So we remove the guidance document. We also remove the method approach and also the consultancy companies, because we only want to focus on the tools themselves. And then we focus on the global. We want the tools to be globally applicable. So we focus on that. And then, of course, we want them to address biodiversity. But if we think about like tools and how they want to, and businesses who want to like contribute in reaching nature positive, we should not only be looking at biodiversity. We should also be looking at natural processes. And that's something that we want to kind of discuss in the next slide. So early on, we also, we were just assessing the tools or evaluating them based on if they address biodiversity or not. But then we realized, as Ellen recommended, that maybe we need to expand it a bit and see if they also address natural processes. And we all know the definition of biodiversity. It covers species, ecosystems, and it does not include agriculture and climate change. So if a tool applies to that, then it doesn't address that. And then we also have like natural processes, and this would cover the other ecosystem services. So this will include water and the carbon sequestration and all. And just to give you and share with you the appreciation we had in doing this disclosure and in doing this project, I'll share with you some of the tools. So I don't know if you've heard about CETUS. So this is made by whale seekers. So what they do is that they use like satellite imagery to monitor marine mammals. And of course, it's like the biodiversity part. And this is one of the tools that are actually available in the matrix. The next one, we think about like natural processes. So what are the tools, example of tools that will fall under this? And there's actually this tool they call CDP Water Impact Index. So you can use this tool to identify how to assess the impact of a specific industry or specific sector in terms of water quantity and water quality. So yeah, and you can just access them freely. So now we looked at what is like how many of the tools address biodiversity, and we already said that it's 34. And in terms of natural processes, there are actually 27 tools that address natural processes. And if we combine them, and if we require the tools to address both, we'll only have about 23% of the 93 tools that were presented earlier by Nobert. And for this study, we are only looking at biodiversity. And if any company aims to like push or contribute to nature positive, it has 3 metrics. So one is species, ecosystems, and the third one will be natural processes. So for this study, we'll just focus on species and also ecosystems. So if you look at the distribution or the application of the tools in terms of species and ecosystems, all of the evaluated tools actually apply to ecosystems, but only 22% or 65% applies to species. And if we require this vote, of course, it will be 65% or 22 tools. So what we did is not just look at species and ecosystem, but actually identify some biodiversity indices in each level. So let's look at species. So for species, there are 22 tools, and we looked at 3 biodiversity indices. The first one is species richness, or the number of the species in a specific area. And then the next one would be range rarity, or this is like okay, so it's if a species is like it's distributed or can be found in a specific habitat range. It also looks at, when you talk about range rarity, the abundance of that specific species in that habitat range. So we also looked at that. The third one would be individual species data, or this is like if they provide like the name of the species. So let me give you an example and help me rate this one. So I'll introduce you one of the tools. It's what we call Arbimon. So it's a platform wherein it's a platform wherein scientists, conservationists can upload bioacoustics. And then you see it's AI empowered. So based on this, what do you think? Does it have species richness? Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. So, so for this one, you'll see that it actually has species richness, because this will give you like the number of species in a specific area. So this is how they would show it in a platform. How about individual species data?
Yes.
Yeah, you see, yes, there's a barbet there, and you actually hear the since it's bioacoustic, you actually hear the sound of that bird. And then how about species range rarity? It's actually very difficult for us, to be honest. But in terms of looking at this specific tool, we weren't actually able to take, this tool wasn't able to take this species range rarity, because it only gives you like the number of species in a specific area, but it doesn't give you like if that species is in that critical range, or I would say that the expected occurrence of that species, and then the abundance of that species in that specific habitat range. Hopefully I explained it a lot better. Maybe Sayam can explain it better, but anyway. Thanks, Sayam. Okay, so let's look at this. So in terms of the 34, so from 93 we go down to 34, what that addresses biodiversity. Most of them would address species richness. So they would give you the number. And then some of them would give you individual species data. But of course, you want to try to look at like, how about combination of each indices? So you see that most of them would really provide the species richness and the individual species data. And very rarely on the rarity or the species range rarity. Okay. That was a joke, but okay. So the rarity of the, okay. Okay, next. So that's the species part. So we now go to the ecosystem part, which is what we say that all the evaluated tools use this kind of level. So if you look at the ecosystems, we actually also identified, do they cover terrestrial, marine, freshwater, each, or like all of them? And you'll see that, surprisingly, 92% of them actually use marine or focus on the marine ecosystem. Which, if you remember in like Nobert's presentation earlier, so this is my presentation, this is my and this is our analysis of like the after. We're in like majority of the tools. So for this Venn diagram, it looks at the tools that only use biodiversity. But if we try to look at the tools that also use or address natural processes, it becomes the opposite. Like the marine will have 92% for if it's if it's addressing biodiversity. But then if we add on the natural processes, and that would reduce to like 19%. So it depends on what you're trying to look at and the tools that you're trying to use for your impact assessment. Okay, and then something that we also observe is that all the evaluated tools analyze spatially. So what do we mean by spatial information? So they use maps, they use satellite imagery to analyze or provide provide inputs to any company, and one of their outputs would be a map. So that's a special information. And an example would be Ocean Plus. I don't know if you've heard of this. So Ocean Plus actually provides you like the up-to-date marine biodiversity or marine and coastal habitat data sets. So it would provide you that it has a lot of like tools that you can go to, and then it would give you, or it will help you decide or help you make effective decisions for if you're working in a marine ecosystem. So this is also. Now, we also looked at different indices for ecosystems. So one is land cover. We want to see like if the tool covered, like if how it will help you show if how the land is being used. Or if it's ecoregion, or like provide information in a specific region, and then it would provide you what are the ecosystems in that specific region. And then the third one would be the ecosystem map, basically providing a map about the ecosystem in a specific that you want it to cover or you want to analyze. So for this one, I'll give an example. It's earth blocks. So it actually ticked all of the boxes for the ecosystem. So it provides like information or helps companies assess their impacts in terms of climate change and biodiversity. And they would provide you, of course, a land cover change, ecoregion. They would also give you insights about it, and also ecosystem map. So this is an example of a tool that ticked all those boxes. And then if we look at like the overlaps in terms of the application of tools in terms of these indices, then we'll see that most of them are really providing ecosystem map, followed by the land cover, and most of that these two indices would be most likely provided by the tools that we have evaluated, or the 34 evaluated tools. So how about protected areas? So when we talk about protected areas, only 12 or 35% of the 34 evaluated tools actually provide information about protected areas. And one of them, of course, is Protected Planet, or it will give you like the source or give you a map of where the protected areas are. So you can be informed if your project, say, or any activity is like in a protected area, or even OECNs. So we also looked at what are the databases that these tools are trying to use. And the popular data sets would be the IUCN Red List, the KPA, the World Database of Protected Areas, but they also take into account like the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity database and ESG database. So there needs to be like a mix now, not just focusing on biodiversity, or not just focusing on the finance side of things, but kind of mixing databases to provide that service to any company. And then we're also seeing like an increase or like majority of the tools using AI and satellite imageries. So in terms of impacts, dependencies, risks, and opportunities, so Harshini covered it earlier. So like impacts and dependencies in terms of like to biodiversity, risks related to like financial risk, brand reputation. And then when it comes to like the opportunities, what are like, it would relate to like the benefits of like doing something in the identified impacts and dependencies on biodiversity. So in terms of this, these are actually the results. So like most of the tools are actually focusing on impacts and dependencies, and a bit on the risk, but I think this is also reflective of what the GBF, it's like, give us the disclosures, and what also Nobert earlier mentioned, that it's really focused on like assessing the impact first, but then what happens next, there's a big question after that. So with that, so here are our observations. So the first observation would be like the number of biodiversity focused tools has been like increasing, definitely. So you'll see like we see a lot of like tools focused on climate change, but we do understand that like for TNFD they kind of need to evolve to cover biodiversity as well. And then there's also I think we think that it is important that when we try to assess nature impacts and dependencies, we need to be very clear on the biodiversity indices. So those are just like the biodiversity indices that we selected for this study, but definitely there are a lot out there that can be used to in doing nature disclosures. So for the other observation, go ahead, Nobert.
Yeah, the other observation, thank you, Czarina. Looking at the number of tools, then we realized, and I mentioned that most of these tools, actually few of them were covered in the financial sector. And it was one of the lowest, even though the main target for TBF call 15 should be focusing on that. So this presents an opportunity for these partnerships between the financial risks and nature-related data sets actually be promoted. And that beyond that, then there is also that opportunity where we can look at this TNFD tools vis-a-vis the Taskforce on climate-related financial disclosures, which actually gave its recommendation, and there are further guidelines which were given to financial and non-financial sectors, looking at different biomes and also the biomes which had the most significant impacts and dependencies. So it's an opportunity for collaboration. The next one, Harshini.
Yeah, so finally, looking at the holistic results, we see that a major focus of most of these tools are the assessment of biodiversity impacts, dependencies, risks, and opportunities. But is there enough support for companies to disclose, set targets, and take action and continually improve on their operations so that it actually helps biodiversity? Are these tools actually supporting companies to make a difference? And is target 15 of the GBF comprehensive enough to actually make the difference? Is it only promoting the assessment of these impacts, and does it stop there? But is it promoting companies to actually take action and make that difference? So we leave you with those two questions, but we hope that you will have questions for us. And thank you so much for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. We've got about 8 minutes left for any questions in the room or online. Deanne, do you have any?
There's nothing online yet, but I'll let you know.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So it was great to see these 3 observations, and I'd like to pick the second one and invite you to talk a little bit more about what you think needs to happen next in terms of really engaging with the financial sector and getting the tools out there that they need.
Yeah, thank you for that. In most cases, I think the reason why some of these tools are really being downplayed by the financial, maybe applicability in the financial sector, is because in most cases, even us, when we're doing this work, we're being asked, oh, so how can a bank maybe apply some of these tools? But remember, when a bank maybe issues maybe loans to different individuals or some financial services, then some of these loans actually go towards implementing some of these projects which have impact on nature. So looking at that, then we really need to look at these tools and how then they can be easily applicable to the financial sector so that at least they can address all these dependencies and also impacts their projects are creating on nature. Yeah.
And I think it's also a call for us, like for NGOs, like we need to kind of expand ourselves to like work with businesses, work with financial institutions to kind of move things forward, because if you want to have them on board, then that is something that needs to be done. And I've seen it in the plastics treaty. They have been like already been active in terms of their statement or how they want to move the plastics treaty forward. So I think there needs to be someone who would like mobilize them so that we will see more tools applicable to the financial sector.
And from my 10 years of experience working with the private sector, I think it's a heavily underutilized opportunity to actually engage these financial institutions because they have the money, they're very eager, but they don't have the means because these tools are not actually supporting their cause. So, companies or institutions actually coming up with these tools should take heed of this requirement and make sure that they can include most of these financial institutions in their work as far as possible.
Yeah, That was a really interesting presentation. Thank you so much for it. And I've got loads of questions, but I should limit myself.
Okay.
Firstly, to say that your last observation is really, really key. What's the point in like measuring and then disclosing when you actually don't do anything about it? So it's really key. When you're thinking about businesses, what was your definition? Because it's one thing to work with governments and impact policy, etc. And government is very much what a unit. But businesses are from an individual right up to an international, global organization with tens of thousands of individuals. And I think, touching on as well about the cost of some of these tools, well, to a big conglomerate, actually, that cost is negligible. So had you specifically thought about certain types of businesses? Because, business is a very broad definition that encompasses so much.
So yes, I think Nobert will touch on a specific element, but I also would like to say that we didn't necessarily look at the applicability in terms of scale. But of course, the general observation is that not all of these tools are applicable to like one-man companies. They might be applicable to big conglomerates. So there is a need for adaptation of these tools as well for scale. And that's definitely a gap that we identified, but we didn't really present that to you.
Yeah, but of course, SbTN is very comprehensive about those different sectors and businesses. So we know that they're trying to align with TNFD, but it gives a very huge scope of those different businesses. But I think from our work, then it's ranging from individual business, because all these businesses, remember, they are in different setups. And the thing is that to develop maybe a comprehensive or a holistic policy for these different countries to adopt, then it means that all these businesses will be impacted. And that is why some of this maybe work with the TNFD is already being rolled out in different countries. And there's some policy frameworks that they are trying to come up with to cover all these different businesses. So depending on maybe location, then I think in most cases, then they'll be able to define their businesses depending on the laws that govern that country.
I think at the core would be like what the GBF mentioned, like multinational companies and financial institutions. But in terms of like assessing or doing the analysis, we kind of expanded it a bit just to cover SMEs and maybe regional businesses, just so to kind of see how it applies, not just on what's written in the GBF, but also what's is in the ground, is on the ground or in reality.
And also just to finish with a key point, as I mentioned earlier, 95% of global businesses are SMEs. For the UK, it's 99.9% are SMEs. So who can actually make use of these tools? I mean, it's a huge question. It seems like these global institutions have basically forgotten the 99.9% of businesses, and they're just only catering to the 0.1% of businesses. So that's a huge gap and a huge issue.
It was sort of linked to what was already just being said, but as we've seen from this presentation, there's so many different tools out there that all do their own little thing. And then there's so many reporting standards, not just TNFD and SbTN, but there's GRI reporting standard, there's so many. So as a business, especially as an SME, it would be so difficult to navigate this setting with all these different standards. And then, I know there's been work done to try and align the different standards and things like that. But it's from a business's perspective, how would you go about identifying all these synergies and things? And then what we've just talked about just now, it's like, where do you maximize that effort? Because financial institutions are so different to SMEs, but then you said the majority of sites are SMEs, majority of businesses. And then it's like, because financial institutions, you could argue, have much more sway, because they not only have sway in all the companies they're investing in, but then those companies upstream and downstream impacts. And through that, you are also looking at SMEs by looking at financial institutions. But it's like a bit of a minefield in a way.
But actually there is sort of a solution to this, because financial institutions, as you said, would have a bigger impact because of the loans and the investments that they make. But it also has to be kept in mind that the financial institutions are the ones which are funding or providing credit to these SMEs to actually carry out their work. So if they can take into account, doing the checks and balances or the relevant checks when they actually do these investments through these SMEs, then the SMEs get checked anyway. So if someone can come up with a procedure to actually streamline all the financial institutions, that will automatically kind of get the SMEs on board, because they will have to then comply with certain things that the financial institutions will need to get them to comply in order for their own compliance. So.
It's got one more question online, and I'll release you. So we've got, I'm interested in the application of IBAT in the mining sector and protected areas. If you were to suggest an update to the IBAT in context of environmental safeguards, what would you suggest? So yeah, in IBAT we have the database of protected areas, and we also have a lot of mining companies use IBAT as well. The IBAT Alliance doesn't itself recommend no-go areas, but there are a lot of sort of best practices out there. So for example, the EBRD and the Asian Development Bank, in their sort of social environmental safeguard policies, they have no-go areas which are a minimum of AZEs, so Alliance for Zero Extinction sites, and also World Heritage sites as well. So that's sort of a minimum no-go area that lots of companies adopt, but you can go further than that and say we're actually going to avoid all protected areas and all key biodiversity areas as well. So yeah, as a minimum, there's that minimum sort of safeguard policy, but lots of businesses are going further to protect sort of additional areas which are critical for biodiversity. So we're at time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in person, online. Really appreciate you coming. If you've got any more questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be really happy to talk you through any of these findings.